From the drones, we come back to our studio where we get to pick up the conversations of the day. Now, this morning, we are looking to the new proposed taxes from the Ministry of Finance for the next financial year, 2026-2027. In revenue enhancement and compliance measures, we get to look at the tax policies and where they get to leave you and me, and how in tandem they actually get to benefit you directly and indirectly, should they be adopted by Parliament and then passed for the next financial year. Now, Uganda is preparing for that financial year estimated at 78.2 trillion Ugandan shillings, from the 69.3 trillion Ugandan shillings, at a time when domestic revenue mobilization is actually becoming more critical. Now, for us as a country, we are having a target of approximately 4.8 trillion Ugandan shillings. This is in additional revenue. Then there's also a 2.3 trillion Ugandan shillings expected from the tax policy changes, and the remainder from the improved compliance as well as enforcement. This also brings in the element of the fiscal deficit that is roughly standing at the 7.6% of the GDP, pushing government to widen the tax base or put more pressure on the same tax base, strengthen compliance, but also introduce new measures. But questions are still remaining about fairness of these taxes, efficiency, and of course the economic outlook and impact. And so to help us unpack this conversation, we are being joined by Honorable Ibrahim Ssemujju Nganda, MP, Kira Municipality, but also who sits on the Budget Committee. Good morning to you, Honorable.
Good morning, and thank you for giving me this opportunity.
It's a pleasure to have you. We're also going to be joined by Honorable Agnes Apea, Woman Member of Parliament, Amolator. She'll be joining us shortly. Let me start with you, Honorable, just to help us unpack this conversation as an icebreaker. Many Ugandans are already feeling the pinch of taxes at every turn, from the mobile money that they are having, to the fuel prices, to the VAT on essential, to mention but a few. So if you were to pick out one tax that Ugandans are feeling on a daily basis, it's affecting their daily lives, which one would it be and why?
First of all, there are direct and indirect taxes. If you look at the proposals you are referring to on petroleum, those are indirect taxes that we are all paying, everybody. I keep telling border borders in Chira that for every liter of petrol, government is charging you 1,000. Initially it was 1,350, 1,550. The passenger is the one who is paying that tax. But because you're not picking directly from your pocket and paying, you're not feeling. Usually the noise is about the direct taxes. If you look at the URA register, people who are paying direct taxes, the register has 5.2 who are registered. But the ones who are paying are about 2.5. And of the 2.5, 1 million are workers because they remove a pay from you. So if you ask the 1 million, the tax that is paying them a lot is pay because they are taking your salary. So if there was any opportunity for people to avoid that, they will avoid it. So you have 1 million that are paying pay. Those ones are crying because of that. The money on airtime, water, and so on and so forth, because it isn't direct, people don't feel it the same way they feel. Because the moment you go to pick your pay slip, you will discover that they have taken your money. And now they want to raise it, I have seen the proposals, to 40%, which means if you're earning $1 million, you will walk home with 600,000. Nearly half of your salary is taken. So that's painful. I remember it must have been 2020 or thereabout. We were approaching polling day. We got to Parliament. They had taken all our money in pay. So what the MPs did, or what we did, was to change the law to exempt ourselves, the judiciary and police and others. So the MPs, and here I plead guilty, do not share this pain. So there will be less debate in Parliament on pay. And I've told you 1 million people are paying that tax every month. It is their salary they need to use to pay school fees that is being taken by government. So when you combine the others on airtime, there are not many people who are going to sit down and calculate how much money I'm paying when I buy airtime. There are not many people who are going to sit down and calculate how much money I'm paying when I am buying a bottle of drinking water. So the more direct taxes people pay on vehicles when they are importing, the traders who pay a bulk of our customs. So they are ones who will feel the pain that I have brought a container. And some time back I met a colleague who was bringing containers from China. And he told me they were now required to pay about 100 million per container. And he said, you can't sell it. I mean, this money is not there in the market. That you pay 100 million upfront. First of all, you haven't earned the money, but you haven't even looked at the goods that are in the container. Sometimes they are brought, they are not up to standard. Or what you're expecting is not what they have brought. So you have two categories that make a lot of noise about taxes. You, the employers, the employees, and then the traders. Because mostly they are the ones who are paying direct taxes. So the ordinary consumer in Uganda does not calculate how much money he pays in a month, because most of the taxes from him or her are indirect taxes.
Well, that's a very interesting opener. The indirect tax that everyone pays, but they don't feel, and the direct tax that mostly is affecting the traders community, but also the corporate world or the private sector by and large. There's also been the perception that tax regimes are unfair to the ordinary citizens, with government not spending the money in fairness or accordance to the satisfaction of Ugandans. What are these taxes and how fair are they or unfair they are for Ugandans?
I think the starting point, the tax is supposed to be a percentage of your GDP, which, if I recall my economics, is the services and goods produced as a country in a year. If you look at all the government targets in the revenue mobilization document, in all the relevant documents, government wants to be collecting 18% of the GDP, of all the goods that are produced in Uganda. They think they should be able to give government at least 18% of that money. And that money, if you look at our GDP now, of course government will give you contradicting figures, but let me take one that is widely. If the GDP is at 226 trillion, 18% of that should be about 40 trillion every year. So government seeks to collect 40 trillion every year from direct and indirect taxes. The trouble, which is the point that you make, when you collect this money, where do you deploy it? If you read the Bank of Uganda's report, the state of the economy, I think the one of December, in the first quarter of this financial year, government borrowed about 7 trillion shilling from domestic market, from banks and pension fund. And the bulk of that money went to recurrent expenditure, buying vehicles for big people, buying them furniture, paying for workshops. When you look at the budget and the way it is structured, the aggregate figures will make everybody who wants to fall very angry. Because the last financial year, government allocated about 300 billion on what they call special meals. I kept asking myself, what is special meal? Only to discover that these mandas that we eat in Parliament is part of the special meals.
Yet the same government was proposing to tax the meals that we eat, as the employees.
So you spend 300 billion on buying MPs, on buying a cabinet, on buying all the big people, mandas for their breakfast. I mean, I keep asking, do I really need that chapati?
But you don't even eat the mandazi, Honorable.
We don't. The committee on budget, we are about nearly 40 MPs. So every morning of a meeting, they will bring those items for 40, and only about 10 are attending. I don't know what happens to the rest. So at the end of the year, you have spent 300 billion on buying people who are in offices, all those sorts of things. And then you are spending another 900 billion on fueling their vehicles, 900 billion. So the amount of money that you are spending, I did a calculation when I was responding to the budget last financial year. You have about 7 trillion shilling that you are spending on buying vehicles, on fuel, on workshop, on special meals, and those other useless items. So the taxpayers will be happy that you've collected the money from people and you are doing their roads, you are improving the infrastructure for education and health. You go to Morago. Morago, in terms of human resource, at the moment is operating at 49%. All the consultants that you need to see there are not there. But even the equipment, most annoying thing, the other day we had we were given, I think by Spain, an equipment for cancer. It remained packed in Morago because the government had not constructed a facility where they can install it. So someone paying tax, whether direct or indirect, will be very angry with the government because you don't deploy their money to improve their lives. You're deploying this money for your luxury. If you read the World Bank report, I think the latest on Uganda, the World Bank argues that for every 5 businesses that are started in Uganda, 4 of them will collapse after 5 years. And the reason they collapse are 2, cost of credit and taxation. Because people go to the banks to borrow at 20%, at 18%, and start businesses. Because Ugandans are very enterprising. Every report you read will tell you that. And then you charge them, you bring IFRIS, you are hounding them in town, you collect money for luxury. And their businesses are collapsing. Every 5 businesses that are started in Uganda, after 5 years, 4 have collapsed, only 1 is surviving. Credit, cost of credit and taxation. So therefore, the pain of a taxpayer is not because too much is taken from him, but when you collect my money, because this is my money, I may not see it, where do you deploy that money?
Okay. That's a very fundamental question to which we believe that Dr. Apea will be picking up from as she joins us for this discussion. Do stay with us. Dr. Honorable Agnes Apea, Woman Member of Parliament, the voice of Amolator, is joining us on set this morning. She also sits on the Budget Committee, and we want to hear from her directly. As we were picking up this conversation, Honorable, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
How are you?
Good, thank you, and thanks for having me here.
It's a pleasure. We're looking into the new proposed taxes in revenue enhancement as well as compliance measures. And the first question that I have for you is, if you were to reflect, engage, or just look at Uganda generally, for an ordinary Ugandan, which is that one tax that is already existing that you believe actually pinches them on a daily basis?
Thank you. Thank you very much. I think the question of taxation is biting in every other aspect, but it is also one of that key issue that an economy like Uganda needs for its growth. And if you say which is that tax specifically, I would say yes, the excise duty amendments that we normally put. And we've argued here again and again, particularly taxes that touches the real livelihood of an ordinary citizen of Uganda. And I think in the last discussion we had here was basically tax on fuel, because fuel then, touches all sectors. It's on transport. That transport translates into the price of the goods, and also the price of that transportation from one location to the other. But by and large, taxation is not bad per se. But for me, the question, the debate should be about the fairness, the efficiency, but also its cost on growth. Who are these people that we are taxing? And what is the cost on their livelihood, their businesses, and their economy? Because you'll agree with me that as Uganda, I know my colleague could have raised this, that our tax ratio to GDP is still very low. And I think it's about 13 to 14%, and the lowest in the region. So as a country, we cannot claim to be the economy, our economy is growing, and yet the growth is based on debt financing. And so as we should be looking at a tax system that is going to help grow the economy, that can then sustainably mobilize its own local or domestic revenue that can finance our social services, can finance our infrastructure. And I entered here when my colleague was actually having an argument about even if we tax our people, do our taxpayers actually trust us? Because taxation and tax collection should be built on trusts and also on the impact that the taxpayer actually sees. So that could be basically really my thoughts around the issue of the impact of taxes on our ordinary citizens, and hopefully that can help us understand it a bit better.
Honorable Ssemujju talked about it in reference to cost of credit and taxation. You've talked about it from the place of cost on growth. And in that aspect, looking to the proposed taxes by the Ministry of Finance, I'll start with Honorable Ssemujju. The reflection on tax systems that are for economic growth. Do these proposals actually lead us into economic growth, or just revenue enhancement for what you called or made reference to earlier, so that there can be some mandazis on some tables and some extravagant spending by government?
But you see, the trouble with the NRM government is that sometimes they are not guided by the points that she makes, that you want to grow the country. If, for example, you look at the tax exemptions, people who benefit are those who can directly speak to Mr. Museveni, or sometimes, I don't think the ministers even have any power. They are just directed, you go to Parliament. They are even now a proposal to exempt some people. Because countries use taxation sometimes to protect some industries, the tax holidays that are usually given. One time I had an argument with the Alan Kajina when she was still Commissioner General, and she arranged it must have been a committee on budget to go to roofings and other companies, including Bidco, because government was exempting those huge companies, and the idea was that these companies are employing, I don't know, hundreds of Ugandans, and you need to stabilize them. But the argument is, the same way you want to stabilize and grow a bigger company is the same way I want to grow and stabilize my shop downtown.
It's the same way me, the small company, I want to grow to be like the big
exactly.
company.
So this policy, because we keep asking, and she knows in our committee, give us the criteria of tax exemptions. Because we just see individuals walk to Museveni, and then Museveni tells Matia Kasaija, you go to Parliament. So there are taxes that are either exempted, but there are also taxes that are imposed to protect local industries. They have this whole idea of build by Uganda, which I don't believe in it. The idea was that you need to protect some industries in Uganda for purposes of employment and so on and so forth. So, but most of the NRM policies, some of them sound good, but they are not deliberate. So they don't apply the same way, they will communicate them. Because if you tax employees, because they usually go for the soft target, because you as an employee, you have no option. By the time you walk to the whichever department, they have already cut your money. You can't argue. It is in the law. So you are angry with your employers, but they're just implementing a policy. So when you tax waters, I was going through the taxes we have. You tax water, you tax airtime, you tax banking, you tax social media, you tax everything. And that's why I told you earlier that if you look at the URA register, people who pay direct taxes, those who are registered, about 5.2. But we spent the whole of last financial year, only 2.5 had paid, so the rest were just redundant. And of the 2.5 who paid taxes, 1 million was payee. So the rest were traders and so on and so forth. So we don't have many people who are paying taxes in Uganda because the economy itself is not doing very well. Sometimes I sympathize with those whose duty it is to fix this economy. Where do you start it? Do you start by taxation, then you kill the little that is there? Or you allow everybody to grow and then you don't have money to do this and that?
Just going through the taxes, the proposed taxes, Honorable, the higher pay for high-income earners, the proposed new 40% rate for employees earning above 10 million per month. Current top rate is 30%. The aim is to increase collection from the high-income taxpayers. I believe that's one of the things that you were talking about. So this is affecting the executives, the consultants, the high-earning professionals. You do have relief for low-income earners. A pay threshold proposed to increase from 235,000 to 335,000, intended to reduce the tax burden on the low-income workers and rising cost of living. You get to look at this targeting entry-level workers, the informal sector transitioning to formal employment. Then there's the changes in the rental tax compliance, income tax compliance. Rental taxpayers may be allowed to pay taxes monthly instead of the quarterly, designed to improve compliance. There's the stronger administration measures, part of revenue coming from the URA enforcement and compliance tightening government. Then there's the overall target behind the proposals, that this amount of money should be coming from these proposals. However, you have mentioned something that I want to dig in, that some of these proposed taxes are to have industry protection over certain industries. Which are those industries you're making reference to?
That's the point I made earlier. If you look at the policy initially, they had wanted to protect agro-processing, they had wanted to protect tourism-related, ICT, and those are the stated policy, but the implementation is different. You will find people who are close, someone is in furniture, is asking for tax exemption. So I said the stated policies are okay, but the implementation is completely different. Even if you have an agro processing company and factory, and you don't have a direct contact with those who make decisions, you will never be exempted. And that's why the beneficiaries usually are the same all the time. So the protection of industries, yes, is something that you'll want to support if we're all judged by the same standards. I asked one time Musasi, who usually represents finance, if I want tax exemptions, where do I go? Because URA can make proposals to finance, but even if they state that you go to a particular office, even if you go there 1,000 times, until Mr. Museveni has told Kasaija that you can exempt Apea because when we were in Ruwero, she was giving us food. And those, for them, they are the considerations. What is stated in the policy is not what they implement. If you are...
So agro-processing is actually seeing the reality of the implementation of that policy.
Yeah, but also
tourism continues to cry instead of benefit from this policy, and ICT is long far behind.
But maybe just a rejoinder on that. I think if you look at that, those tax proposals generally, the ones you've stated and what we have seen in the budget framework paper, and I think today we are meeting them on the ministerial policy statement to concretize really the real issues. I think what the proposals is indicating, the drivers there is basically to widen the tax base, because at the moment, like my colleague has rightly said, our tax base is so narrow. We project the 2 million people, only 1 million is paying, and the others are not paying. So basically, the tax proposals are looking at the broadening of the tax base. But also, I also see a bit of their desire to enforce the compliance, right? We may also see, like the way you're seeing, the excise duty might actually also increase. And the element of tax exemption has always been a very big elephant in the room, particularly for us who sit in the budget and the finance committee. You're seeing, yes, in policy we say we want to reduce tax exemptions. But I think already we have about 2 or 3 proposals on the table. I think what the country needs is the transparency and the processes of how these things are done. And if tax exemptions is there, if you are exempting Ssemujju, also exempt me, but don't only choose a few and the rest. Unfortunately, most of the companies actually we see, majority of them are kind of foreign, not so much on the local industries that we see. But tax exemptions per se is not a bad thing. It's one of those tax proposals that actually helps the industries.
Doctor,
and
I think
economies to
Ugandans
grow.
have accepted that the idea of taxes exemption is not for Ugandans, it's for other people.
No, it's for everyone. We just need to be transparent.
In principle, it is for everyone.
Yes.
In reality, it's a different story. And that is the story that Ugandans sit with because they are not seeing it. And at the end of the day, something that Honorable Ssemujju mentioned, that the reality is different on ground. I am okay paying the taxes, but how do I get to see them affecting, improving me directly or indirectly? Speaking of the excise duty targeting the daily consumption goods products, you said that the tax system is intended for economic growth. Please give us the indicators of economic growth on increase on sugar, on fuel, on my mobile money transactions, on my ATM transactions, to mention but a few.
No, I think if I say that taxation should focus on growth areas, I don't mean that it should come to the airtime and should come to this. We need to identify the growth sectors, for example. At the moment, one of the key contributors to our GDP is gold, right? But if you look at the taxation
which is also
in that sector,
the gold,
which should actually be giving us much more revenue than the small ones that we are talking about, it is that area where, again, the tax system is not clearly coming out. That's what I mean. That can our taxation start focusing on the growth area? For example, mineral development. This is an area where there's a lot going on in the mineral development sector, and we know that we're really an enriched country with so many minerals. But if you go in there, you're not going to see those progressive taxing system that will help us generate revenue. In fact, if I talk about the tax that can lead to our economic growth, then our system should be able to focus on that. Otherwise, we then put tax burden on a few people, like the ones you've read. These are the same old tax contributors over the years. What we are asking in this proposal, can their tax-based broadening include some of these growth sectors that we know and we see, and the financials are showing that they're actually doing well? So I think that is where the debate should be. So we have the mineral sector, we have that, which is of course having the gold, even the tourism sector that you're talking about. Much as we invest little revenue, but our financials, our records are showing that that is one of the areas that is contributing more. So can we start, innovating tax systems that leaves those small ones, empowers them to contribute more, but also...
At what point does that innovation of such tax systems begin?
I think
where does it begin?
I think that's why we're having this debate. And I'm sure that this debate somehow goes to inform some of the people who are actually responsible. And even at Parliament, when they come, these are the kind of debates that we have. With URA, we always tax them to say, what is new this year? I think that is a question that some of us always ask. What is new this year? Is it the same pay? Is it the same informal sector that we normally talk about? Because if we are targeting the informal sector, it's not bad to register and involve more people in the taxation processes. But what is it in that we are empowering? It's like they're saying that we want to milk a cow, but we do not want to feed that cow. Now, our argument in all this has been, can we feed the cow? Can we go downtown? What is the issue? You
told us that the cow is self-feeding in various different ways, to which I want to turn to him and ask the expenditures that you earlier alluded to within government, that if only that money could be redirected positively, it would go a long way in enabling Ugandans to be okay with the tax regimes that could be proposed, knowing very well that at the end of the day, in their various sectors, they will actually see an improvement, even if by an inch or 0.01% as far as economic and social growth is concerned. So should government first consider cutting the expenditure that they do have on their hand currently before introducing these new taxes?
Yeah, because you see, if you collect money and you are spending on yourself, you can only be brutal in collecting that tax. Because, look, you start with ourselves, MPs and ministers, even ministers that are not known by anyone. You meet a minister with 3 vehicles. And I have told you, every year we are spending nearly R1 trillion on buying fuel. And these fellows who run farms in Ankole and Chigezi, every weekend they fill those huge vehicles to go and check on their farm. And the cost is 900 billion every year. And then you need about 200 billion to replace those vehicles. Bank of Uganda, in their State of the Economy report, is telling you that in the first quarter of this financial year, when we picked 7 trillion from domestic market, borrowed, only about 600 billion was used on development. So you've picked 7 trillion from banks, from pension fund, and you're using it on recurrent current expenditure. And they mention, they usually camouflage it as transport equipment, but buying vehicles. If you journalists observe and look at the beginning of the new term, every office, whether it's parliament, whether president's office, whether local government, they're going to be buying vehicles, they're going to be buying furniture. So the ordinary person you are taxing will want you to deploy that tax on his road and a bridge and school and health facility. And they want to see you living a modest life. I usually keep giving examples of Iran. When Ahmadinejad was in office as a president, he said, first, I don't want a presidential jet. Things that Museveni said when he came here. He said the office must not feed me because I have a salary. I asked the NRM people in the parliament, we pay salary. Mr. Museveni's salary is 3.6 million if you look at the Presidential Emoluments and Benefits Act. He doesn't want it increased because he wants to create an impression. And then you have a $1 trillion budget at your residence. You come to parliament, you are spending $1 trillion shilling on parliament.
Someone is inquiring if the president's salary is taxed, but I'm sure it also falls in that bucket of the tax exemptions that you gave yourselves as members of parliament.
Does he even know it?
Yeah.
Because this salary is 3.6. And he said don't touch it because he wants to get an impression that he works for free. And then he has a $1 trillion budget at his residence.
So if he says don't touch it, it means it is budgeted for it.
He said he gave it to NRM. So for the point that I'm making is that if you are correcting all this money, because if you go through the list of taxes, you're taxing things including bottled water. We had a quarrel with the ministers the other day when they came to the Committee on Finance, that you want people to be healthy, and you are taxing bottled water. What is the intention? That reserve it for only a few, because you should be spreading that facility to everybody, but you are taxing it. Because the tendency by a government, as I said earlier, is to go for the soft target: airtime, beer, soda, rental.
Yes, they go for that soft target. Case in point, or an increment on sugar is going to mean that the people in Amolator who've been enjoying a cup of tea or porridge will have to now consider either take dry tea, or alternatively they can go for honey. Simply because they have to live within their means. Unfortunately, while the government is still picking up these taxes, as we are paying double, we are paying to the tax collector, and at the same time we are paying a lot of extra, or we have to now look for alternative, which means a diversion of incurrence in cost in order to be able to live within or stay within. So at the end of the day, Doctor, let me find out from you, maybe it's at this place where, or what is your position on government reducing on its borrowing rather than increase on its taxes? Because we do believe we collect a good amount of money, but utilization of this money is...
I think let's separate two things. One is that as a country we need taxes to run the economy. Sure. That is a fact. Yes. Then there is the efficiency that we know, and my colleague and myself agree with, that the way we use our taxes, or the way we use our budgets, that budget efficiency needs to be looked into. And so for the issue of taxation, we agree that yes, we need to collect tax. But how do we collect it? What is the timing? Who are the people that we are targeting? And then from there we need a system that is going to be cognizant of the issues that I think my colleague has already brought, that you are looking at a small business who is struggling so much, the shopkeepers down in Amolator, in Chikubu and all that. Can we develop a tax system that is not going to be so regressive that they cannot develop? I think he was giving you data when I was entering here that how come that most of our businesses are not thriving? They die. In the first year, in the fifth year, they are no longer there. Maybe our tax system needs to be reviewed. For me, that is the angle we should be looking at.
Our borrowing needs to be reviewed.
I think taxation and borrowing are not the same thing. The borrowing, actually, the tax person would tell you that if we tax more, then the taxation, we will generate more domestic revenue and reduce on the borrowing. Okay? Now, the borrowing context you're bringing is that when we go and borrow from the domestic market, from our local commercial banks, then we are carving out our own people from borrowing. That is what increases the interest. It is also what gives the banks are more comfortable borrowing to government than to ordinary person. And so then, as government, we are carving out the private sector from the fiscal space. So the borrowing, the taxation, and the efficiency, it is true that our budget's execution, we need another day to come back and discuss about it.
We will look for that other day.
Otherwise, it is really something that is impacting so much on this tax system.
Okay.
Because our taxpayers are no longer confident on the system itself, and they are also not comfortable because they don't see the impact of the tax that they pay. And I think for me, that is an issue that requires a lot of awareness, a lot of engagement, but also a system that is accommodating.
Awareness and engagement, are you talking about the citizen,
or
are you talking about our leaders who are intended to actually help the government?
Both the taxpayers, and the policy makers, and the tax collectors. Because the tax collector just come for him, he wants the tax. He has no idea what somebody is going through.
Honorable Ssemujju, the alternative government always has alternative proposals to some of these pressures that the country is feeling, especially as far as keeping it afloat economically. What are the alternative proposals that...
Let me give you the proposals we made this financial year. First, we looked at people who are employed by government, public servants. There are about 400,000, less than 500,000.
Yeah.
You have a budget of 72 trillion, and 40% of that budget is going to pay debt.
Yeah.
What it means, because the wage bill last financial year was above 8.3 trillion. And we looked at the figures that go with these people, the 400. I earlier told you travel inland. We are spending 976 billion. And this means allowances. When these big people travel, me and Apea, you go to Mbali, they give you 400 to go and sleep in a big hotel. You can't sleep in a...
Which they also paid for.
Because they give you 400,000 to sleep in that hotel. Every day you are out. And when you see government people moving around, you know that they are spending money. 976, you have consultancy, 600 billion, special meals, 492 billion. You have fuel, 450, workshops, 296 billion, welfare and entertainment, 207 billion, research expenses, 183 billion, vehicle maintenance, 171 billion, donation, because the big people must also donate when people are singing for them, 168 billion, beddings and clothing, footwear, 142, travel abroad, 138 billion, vehicle acquisition, 96 billion, books, newspapers, 71 billion. You buy books and newspapers for big people, furniture, 54. The total of the amount of money that you are spending on the less than 500,000 people working government is 12 trillion every year. That money you have collected from everybody, including yourself here. They come here and pick part of your salary and then go and... So our proposal was that let's reduce on the wage bill, but also reduce on the other recurring, invest this money, because you have nearly 60% of the population in agriculture. But these days, on the streets of Kampala, you go and buy pineapple, 10 of them, 10,000. Will that person ever be able to take a child to school, to a good school? So you keep them living the same lives. So our proposals were on expenditure, but also the reduction of the budget. You don't have to give a country 70 trillion budget which you cannot finance. Reduce, make it about 45. And then reduce taxes. Make sure the businesses that you are killing in arcades survive. And then once the country has grown, like you see in Europe, everybody now get taxed and taxed heavily. But for you, you're starting with taxation. It never works anyway.
Okay. That being said, a quick fire round, and this is one response, no explainer, just off head. Should Uganda introduce wealth tax, Doctor?
But the answer is yes, so don't begin.
And she made reference to it, and then she said, so.
I think, okay, you want a yes or no?
Yes.
Yes, me, I give you mine. We should tax people who have a lot of
Doctor,
money.
you're the one who made reference to this.
Of course, but you didn't want me. You don't want me to explain, right? No, I think yes. Taxation should really be fair. People who have more should be taxed more.
Okay. VAT essentials. I mean, should essentials be VAT free? Yes or no?
Water.
Yeah.
Sugar.
Because you're going to take a cup of tea. You need that sugar.
Yeah. No, but I think tax exemption or making it free and all that may be good in the short term, but the effect may be in the long term. For me, I think taxation is good, but let it be fair. Even if you're taxing sugar, you're taxing water and all that, you should consider the fairness and the impact it has on the ordinary people.
Should MPs approve these new proposed taxes, yes or no?
They haven't brought them.
They haven't brought them.
They're going to come.
These are
You see,
assumptions.
last financial year, they had even brought a tax on kerosene.
Even for kerosene, we said no.
So usually MPs on taxation,
Yeah.
it's a few fanatics who will support everything.
Yeah.
Okay. One last question on tax holidays and tax exemptions. That one. Where do you both stand, Doctor?
I believe tax exemption is good, but we need a transparent and an inclusive tax exemption. It shouldn't be for a few. If it is there, let it benefit all those who qualify.
And I concur.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. I may be the moderator, but I concur. Yesterday we were having a discussion here with UEDCL analyzing their 1 year, and of course they made mention of the fact that there is a government initiative for increasing connectivity across the country, but this information is not information that is, publicly available, so that Ugandans can benefit for as low as 30,000 Ugandan shillings to get an electricity connection to their communities, to their homes, to their facilities, industries, bookshops, to mention but a few. But it's an initiative that is there. So all these things are in the heart, is in the right place. It always stays in the right place. But how the body gets to move, regardless of where the heart is what makes the difference. So as Uganda is preparing for the next financial year, the balancing act remains delicate. Government must raise the funds that they need to make those roads that you're complaining about, those hospitals that you're complaining about don't have doctors, don't have hospitals. These taxes are necessary for that. For the education sector improvement, these taxes go a long way in that. But also, at the other side, there's assurance that the taxation does not stifle businesses. It does not stifle the, the ordinary Ugandan's burden that is already stretching them in terms of daily living. For the market vendor in Karere, the border rider in Gulu, the salaried earner in Kampala, and even Ugandans in the diaspora supporting families back home, these tax proposals are not just policy discussions. They directly shape our daily life. And so, without